there, above the fireplace. Downtown Madison, Kiwanis, January 10th. Let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all. We have 20 members here, one guest, and we're going up and up. 3, 7, 10, I believe. 9 members and one guest. Ron Schuler is with us again from Madison West. So we have a good turnout for our talk that Michael Doran will introduce our speaker today.
Thank you, Kevin. Can you all hear me okay? Good. So I'd like to introduce Professor Claus Andersen. He's a native of Denmark. He came to Wisconsin in August of 2017. He is the Paul and Renate Madsen Professor of Scandinavian Studies at the university. He's been teaching in this field for more than 15 years at the University of Minnesota, UCLA, the University of Texas at Austin, and the University of Helsinki in Finland. He conducts research on Scandinavian culture, history, and literature. Currently, he is researching Norwegian writer Karl Ove Knausgaard and his 6-volume autobiography, My Struggle. He has plans to do research on radical forms of radicalism in the examination of how Hans Christian Andersen, through his formalistic features of his fairy tales, often early criticism of capitalism, and how he early saw that capitalism in the 19th, in addition to commodifying the human existence, puts limits on what he means to be human. Please welcome Professor Andersen.
Thank you so much, Michael, and thank you so much for the invitation. Thank you for having me. I'm sorry I can't be there in person, but I think with the situation with COVID as it is right now, and since I have kids in school who attend in-person school, I think it's safest to do it this way at this point. But I would love the option of coming back when hopefully we move beyond COVID at one point. But let me see if I can just change the slide here. As Michael said, my name is Claus Elholm Andersen. I'm the Paul and Renate Madsen Professor of Scandinavian Studies here at UW-Madison, and I'm right now sitting actually in my office, or at least my office this year, which is in the University Club building. So that's why it's not so. It's a temporary office, so it doesn't look as exciting. I'm not a scholar of happiness. I'm not a scholar of Scandinavian welfare state, but I'm teach those topics, though my main research area is literature. Just before I get started and slowly dig into this, I just want to let you know a couple of things that, as Michael also said, I came to UW-Madison in 2017. And there are a couple of things here that I'm really proud of and really have made me feel at home here. Part of that is, I don't know how many of you know this about Bucky's tuition promise, where we actually have a free ride for a number of students here at the university. Right now, it's about a quarter of our freshman class that gets a free ride if they're Wisconsin students. And I think that means that we get a lot of students here that typically wouldn't be able to attend the university otherwise. So I think something we're really, really proud of and hopefully can extend. The other thing is that you probably know UW-Madison is a university of many firsts. And when we compile this list, or when the university relations compile this list, I'm always fascinated to see what's very, very first on the list. And that is that UW-Madison has the nation's first Scandinavian Studies department. In fact, we might, at least we believe we can extend that and say we have the world's first Scandinavian Studies departments, and we date back to 1875. So it's a strong and long heritage of Scandinavian studies here at the university. And with that, I'm going to start digging into my topic, the Scandinavian recipe of happiness. And I'm just going to give very briefly a tentative definition of happiness from Merriam-Webster, which is a state of well-being and contentment. Just to make sure I'm not talking about happiness as a Disney happy end, but more this contentment, how we are feeling, right? This other notion that we have to be happy, and as long as we find love, everything will solve itself, is a notion of happiness that has created a lot of problems and has a lot of ethical issues as well. And maybe we can talk about that later too. I want to begin with a small anecdote. 2 months ago, I was in Denmark in early November. And typically for the past many years, I go to Scandinavia in the summer, where it's friendly, people are smiling, it's sunny, and everyone seems to be outside. So it was really nice being back in November and remembering what the country is actually like most of the year. And there was one particular Monday afternoon, I was taking a walk in a small town on the peninsula of Jutland that has about 5,000 people living in it. And it was sort of raining a little bit. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It had already started to get dark, and everything seemed cold. Everyone I met seemed grumpy. No one were smiling. I went into a store, and everyone seems to be busy, in a hurry, pushing others away. The cashier didn't say thank you or welcome or have a good day. Very, very typical everyday life in Scandinavia. And I think that image, right, is really good to have in mind when we talk about happiness in a Scandinavian context. Because when we talk about Scandinavia, right, we typically talk about the World Happiness Report. We talk about Scandinavia as the world's happiest area, with Finland for the past 4 years being the most happy country in the world, and prior to that Denmark, Norway for 1 year, and prior to that Norway for 10 years. But happiness in this context, right, does not mean that people walk around and are smiley and are friendly and are welcoming you into the country. It means, again, something about the contentment of their everyday life. But that November day in walking around reminded me of one of my favorite poems from when I was a graduate student by a Danish poet by the name of Henrik Nordbrandt. And the title of the poem is called "The Year Has 16 Months." And I should tell you, Henrik Nordbrandt, even though he was Danish, has lived most of his life outside Denmark, in Turkey and Greece, because he simply just can't stand being in Denmark because it is dark, it is cloudy, it is rainy, and it is cold. So here's the poem, or at least part of it, that I'm going to read to you. So the poem is called "The Year Has 16 Months." The year has 16 months: November, December, January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October. Can any of you guess what the last 4 months are? It was exactly that feeling I had that afternoon. November, November, November. And I think that really captures what Scandinavia can also be like. So yes, let's turn to the World Happiness Report. Currently, in the latest report on happiness, Finland, as mentioned, is the happiest country in the world, with Iceland right after. And typically when we see these lists, at least Denmark, Iceland, and Finland and Norway seem to be on the top of the list. In fact, here you can see the countries that each have appeared most times among the top 10 happiest country in the world. This, of course, raises the question of how can we measure happiness? And typically we would have a question like, how are you doing? And with previous, I mean about 25 years ago, before the US started compiling their happiness report,
Studies.
you would use an income as a measurement for happiness. You would say someone makes this much, or you have the GDP per capita, and that kind of would tell us how a country was doing. But the other question, of course, right, is that we can say, well, answer 2, I'm grumpy and tired. How do we avoid that being the answer to the question? And the answer to that is that we distinguish between 2 kinds of happiness. We distinguish between the affective happiness or the affective happiness is like when my 6-year-old daughter, by 6 o'clock in the morning, starts screaming because she doesn't want to eat her breakfast. It's not as bad as it used to be, but that's the affective one, right? If someone called me there and say, are you happy? No, I'm not happy, right? Because it's 6 o'clock in the morning, I'm tired, and my daughter is screaming at me. That's the affective. The other one is what we would call the cognitive happiness, and that's what they're after in the UN happiness report, which where you ask the question, taking all things together, would you say that you are very happy, quite happy, not very happy, not very happy at all? And the UN report asks people to think about a ladder where 10 is, I'm really in the place in my life where I want to be. And 0 is, nothing seems to be going the way I had hoped it would. This then, for the final score, is combined with questions about freedoms in the country, equality, and a couple of other measures that they include in deciding happiness. And what we know about happiness, and what we know from the research of happiness, is that community, friendship, and togetherness are the things that makes us most happy. I'm going to say that again. Community, friendship, and togetherness. Community, right? That we have a purpose, that we feel seen and accepted in our neighborhood. Friendship, that we have someone who sees us, someone we can engage with that knows us, and togetherness, that we have a social circle of sorts, right? Which is unfortunately really hard in these COVID times, where we are together with other people. If we're looking at an American context, some of you might know Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone that came out in 1999. Putnam was is a sociologist from Harvard. He's retired now, and his main argument in this book was that what we had seen in the US changed in the generation was that there were an increase in people bowling, but a decrease in bowling leagues and people bowling together. So you have more people going bowling in the US, but more people are doing it alone. Right? And that says something about the fabric of the country and something about some of the problems that he sets up there. He also distinguishes in the book, which is a really interesting book, I would recommend it, between what he calls bonding social capital and bridging social capital, which might be something that can help us explain the polarization that we see in society now, much more explicit here in the US, I would say, right? But it's also something that has spilled into Scandinavia in a certain way. Bridging social capital, that means that we get to see, as a book bestseller from the late 19th century sound, how the other half lives. That we are together with people who look different than us, think differently than us, who has a different lifestyle and income. In the US, it has also been pointed to the draft at being that equalizer, right? The bridging social capital, where you get to see people who come from a completely different background than you, and because of that, you would develop an empathy and a bigger understanding for problems in the society. You can also think about it maybe, right, in busing programs for schools have been attempts, right, to make bridging social capital as well. So kids get to know kids who do not look like them, who don't think like them, who come from a different background. My neighborhood, right, I should maybe say the other thing, right, and Putnam says is bridging social capital is on its way out, and what is replacing it is bonding social capital, meaning that we surround ourselves with people who look like us, who think like us, and who has the same value as us, right? And I should say I live on the west side. I don't know if any of you live here on the near west side here in Madison, right? Most of my neighbors are professors. Almost all of them drive Subarus. And I think we can all imagine and guess how they think, right? Politically and about the world. During the presidential election last year, there were not many Trump signs in my neighborhood, so I should add. And of course, that means that when I send my kids to school, they go to school with children of professors who have the same values, who think the same way as them. And that is a little bit some of the problems that Putnam he addresses in that book. The fact that more and more people are bowling alone, as Putnam puts it, right, means that today more people than ever before say that they are lonely. A high number of young people say that they don't have anyone that they can depend on. They don't feel they have anyone they can depend on. Many of the students I have here, they say they don't have a best friend, someone they really truly can talk to about their problems, someone that knows them. And that, of course, is a problem because loneliness has a tremendous impact on how we feel, on our physical well-being as well. Someone has suggested that loneliness has the same effects on our mortality as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So what can you do with this? Well, in France, actually, they have been pretty drastic. I guess most of you know this pyramid, or at least some version of it, right? From that we see officially, this is how you should eat, this food pyramid. But in France, they have added an additional aspect, which is that the French government encourages and strongly suggests that you should eat together as a family or with friends as much as possible. The more you do so, it also has health benefits, but the more you do so, the less lonely you will feel, right? And I look around my building here when I'm sitting. I mean, most of us, including me, very often, right? We sit and eat lunch alone in front of our computers instead of just sitting together in a common room or going out for lunch together. So of course, that has a certain level of sadness to it. So can't we just buy a way out of this loneliness and buy some happiness instead? Well, we can maybe buy wine, but I'm not really sure that that solves any problem. But as you also probably know, what we call conspicuous consumption, right? Spending money, going buying new things, doesn't really solve anything. It gives us, all research show, right, a feeling of contentment, but it doesn't last long. It ebbs out very quickly. But that doesn't mean that money and happiness is not related. Quite contrary, right? We do know that if you, for instance, move from income around 20,000 to 50,000 approximately, right, you double your level of happiness. So simply, if you have a $50,000 income, there are some of the problems you might not have if you only make 20. You might not have to worry as much about food. There's less food insecurity, and you will also easily be able to go out and buy a car, or at least get it repaired. There's just some basics that will be taken care of. If you then go from 50,000 to 105,000 income, there's only a slight increase in happiness. And in fact, some scholars have suggested that just around 100,000, it splits a little bit, right? It is the ideal income for life satisfaction. In fact, making more than that, right, does not make us happier. And there is a point where higher income leads to more insecurity and more worries, and actually where it goes the opposite direction. So some scholars have actually in recent years suggested, this is some new scholarship, that there's actually a reverse relationship between money and happiness, where you can't buy happiness, but happiness might buy you money. That someone who is content, someone who is happy in their job, for instance, ends up with a larger life income, is more likely to get a promotion than someone who is not. So there might be a reverse. So what does all of this have to do with Scandinavia? Well, my argument is in all of this, right, that part of why Scandinavia ranks so high in all of these is that a lot of things that seem to worry people in a Scandinavian context, it's taken out of the equation. And that is what we refer to, right, as the Scandinavian welfare state. The Finnish-American writer, Anu Partanen, she has written, some of you might know her book, The Nordic Theory of Everything, which is also another way to talk about it, is the Nordic theory of love. That is, of course, an extremely positive spin on the welfare state. There are many problems with the welfare state. There's many problematic issues that we can address if you have any questions about it as well. But basically what the welfare state does, it takes some of the worries out of the equation, right? And the biggest one here, of course, is the public healthcare, right? Or semi-public, because there's always private elements to it in the Scandinavian countries. The other aspect is what's called flexicurity, the golden triangle of the labor market, where you have a very flexible labor market. And by that means that it's very, very easy to hire and fire people in Scandinavia. Some of you might know from France, it's really hard to fire people because the unions are very strong. Yes, in Scandinavia, unions are very strong too, but they know it is important for a flexible labor market to be created, that it should be easy to lay off people as well. That means that in order to do that, then you need a generous welfare system as well. So if someone loses their job, at least temporarily, they don't have to worry about losing everything. And then there are active labor market policies and activation programs that help people getting back in labor. And one of my favorite examples for all of this is that a big slaughterhouse in a small town in Denmark was closed about a decade, or it was announced it was closed, should close about a decade ago, right? Very similar to the situation we hear here in the US, where GM has closed a number of factories just in the past year, right? Affecting communities drastically. There were 500 people employed in this slaughterhouse, and they would all lose their job. Early on, the owners of the slaughterhouse reached out, let people know about this. It says in about 6 months, we're gonna close down. And then the welfare system kicked in and started working on an individual basis with the employees. And a year after the slaughterhouse had closed down, 95% of the employees had found new employment. Many of them had gone through training as well in order to do that. So that's what meant with flexicurity, that the three elements of the labor market are very flexible. The other part also is that there is very much a free time in a Scandinavian context, right? There's a very big focus on life-work balance. And all of this has to do with the free, or not free, but at least the public childcare, which means that children with family don't have to worry about their children, and that they will get quality care as well. And also there are shorter days, work days. The work week is typically only 36 hours instead of here 40 hours. It also means that employers are very focused about making sure that their employees don't work too much. Of course, everyone has deadlines, and sometimes you need to pull in extra time, but it is very important for the employers to make sure that the employees are happy in their job. You don't find situations, as you often do here, at least I've experienced, right, where people work 50, 60 hours a week out of fear of losing their job. Because if they lose their job, they will lose their health care, and then their children and everyone will be in peril. Here, that worry does not exist quite as much as it does in a Scandinavian context. And then finally, of course, the final thing we might take up in talking about the welfare state here is the question of free college or university, which is an equalizer in terms of making sure that more people get a education and get highly trained and skilled jobs. That's why I'm so happy about this. As I said earlier, the Bucky's Tuition Promise here at UW, because it really works as an equalizer and helping students who come from a less privileged background, right, to come in and get a chance at a good life. If we then compare all of this to the US, right, then we know that healthcare is the main worry about Americans, right? It is that creates that tension. You're always worrying, if I lose my job, I will lose my health insurance, right? And my children will be whatever is going on. And that is even more become even more clear now during COVID, where you simply just will see the worry seems to be unexpected medical bills, health insurance deductible, prescription drug costs, and et cetera, and et cetera. And I think one thing that is really interesting here is that the high health expenditure as you have here in the US doesn't really mean much in terms of life expectancy. If you look at most European countries or other OECD countries, as this one is, you'll see that the US spends significantly more on healthcare than any other country, but people live shorter than in any other country. So I think that is a really interesting statistic to look at. The last element I want to add to this discussion here is the Danish concept of hygge, which I was also reminded of that November when I was in Denmark. Hygge, as some of you might know, right, can be defined as pleasant togetherness. And it's a concept that has been promoted, and you might have heard about, been published in books and an article in the last couple of years, 5-6 years or so. When we talk about hygge as pleasant togetherness, there are two elements, right? There's the atmosphere, the components that make up hygge, and then there's the social aspect, the people that create hygge. And in a Scandinavian context, right, hygge is a way to socialize, to embrace what normally would be seen as detrimental towards your happiness. Being with people, being with friends, embracing the darkness, the cold, the winter. And you do that simply just by changing a little, maybe in your house. That can be the atmosphere, right? You can turn on some candles, you can have indirect lighting, you can have a hot drink, or you can have some relaxed clothing. That is part of creating that atmosphere. My favorite, I mean, my family, right? We live here in Madison. We have candles lit 6 months of the year when we're eating dinner. We have, I think many guests get frustrated because we don't really have that much light in our house. We have enough to sit and read, but much of our lighting is indirect, right? That creates these little cozy corners that you might want to sit in and enjoy. And I mean, I remember still vividly the first time I met my in-laws. They live in San Diego, and San Diego, as you know, is already very sunny and light and welcoming. And we were then sitting down and having dinner, and then my father-in-law turns on what I call the stadium lighting, like these 400 100-watt light bulbs that just blinded us almost as we sat and ate our dinner, and killed all the atmosphere that was there. It was good food. They're really nice people, I should say, but at least this is some of the things you can do with hygge. That was the atmosphere. The social thing, right, in the pleasant togetherness is about closeness, spending times with people, spending time with your family, insisting that we're gonna have that dinner together, insisting we're gonna sit down and have a cup of coffee. In my family, and this is something that is become such an ingrained part of both my American wife and my 2 kids as well, is that on weekends we have what we call afternoon snack or afternoon coffee. So mid-afternoon, no matter what we're doing, what we are off to, cleaning, reading, playing, we sit down for 5 minutes and we have a cookie or a cracker or whatever else, little sweet of some sort, and my wife and I, a cup of coffee. And just those 5 minutes in the middle of the afternoon, right, means that we are here together. We are in unit as a family. And that is what the closeness can do. Friendliness is part of this atmosphere as well, right? Where you invite people into your home in the to create this atmosphere of pleasant togetherness. But of course, it seems to suggest or that there is a certain egalitarianism, right? That it is the people that you are with are someone who are like you, think like you. Not that you can't have political discussions. You have that all the time in Scandinavia, but it is typically political discussion with people you don't really disagree that much with. So that is the aspect of hygge. And I think what is interesting about hygge and the way that we can use it is that hygge, I'm just going to skip through some of this here so we can go to some question, is that hygge seems to, as a concept, embrace all of the things that make people happy in Scandinavia. The togetherness, the friendliness, and the inclusion. So I think what I want to conclude here by saying, before I open up for question and discussion and whatever you might have, I'm really looking forward to hearing what you say, is that maybe we should start embracing hygge, that it might just makes us both healthier and happier. Thank you.
Richard? We have the Zoom mic.
Yes, right.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. And so if
Okay.
there's any question, anything you want, it doesn't have to be related to what I talked about here. It can be, yeah, go ahead.
I will relay the questions if you can't hear them. Tom?
How much of the happiness quotient from these Scandinavian countries is based upon the fact that they're small, homogeneous populations?
How much of the happiness perhaps in Scandinavia is due to their small homogeneous populations where everyone is alike? It's an excuse we use in education to say that's why they succeed. They have, all students are alike. Is that a valid argument?
To some extent, yes, right? I mean, when when you're asking people, if you think about it in terms of the welfare state, right? And that you want to support people having health insurance, you want to support through your taxes people getting benefits. It is, of course, much easier to being asked to pay taxes when it's someone who looks like you, think like you, who's closer to you in a way, right? So that's where the homogeneity really comes in. What you see in Scandinavia today is that we had large groups of immigrants that have come to Scandinavia in the past 30, 40 years. Most of them come to Sweden, right, where you have a very large immigrant population today. And that is something you see some of the right-wing anti-immigrant parties have taken up, right, and using like, you shouldn't pay taxes because we need to get them out so we can have our own welfare state to ourselves. So the homogeneity plays a big part of it. But you can argue, right? As you say in education, they're all alike, and I assume that that's the argument you hear with Finland, who for some years were known to have the best schools in their country. And I think in terms of the education for Finland specifically, right? What Finland did, I think if you're really cynical and looking at education, right? Most educational systems either lose the top 20% or the bottom 20%. They're always hard to really get everyone at the same level. But in a Finnish context, and I've lived, as Michael said, I've lived 6 years in Finland, so I've seen it firsthand, is that what they're so extremely good at is that if there are people who need extra help in the educational system, they get it right away. So that means that school in a area with a lot of immigrants with a lot of social problems, they have much more money, they have much more support than the white upper middle class school, because they need that to get up to the same level. What this Finnish system does not do as well is they forget a little bit the top 20%, right? They don't challenge them as much. And that top 20%, right, is where the US really excels in advanced math classes, advanced AP classes in high school, and so on.
Jim.
Yeah, your friend, Dr. Masden, I asked Dr. Masden once why he came to the United States. And he said one word, taxes. So can you sort of elaborate on what the comparison, the differences between Scandinavia and the United States are in terms of taxation?
Yes. I mean, I should say a lot have changed, right? And a lot have changed. And you probably all heard the horror stories of Scandinavia in the 60s with these extremely high tax rates for everyone, right? And I mean, you used to have it here as well. But it used to be to the point where it was almost impossible, right, in Scandinavia to become a millionaire because you were taxed so heavily. That is not the case anymore. You have income tax and you have sales tax. And the sales tax is more or less, I mean, depending from country to country, it's between 12 and 25%. So that is a pretty steep tax rate. And the income tax starts around, I think, 28% and then goes up. Very few people pay more than 60% of the last earned dollar, right? So that means you might have, if you make $200,000, you are for the first $50,000, you're only taxed, right? The progressive tax rate, it's only for the very last few dollars you are taxed at a higher rate. But I can show you a fun little here that I've always enjoyed. Let me see if I can do that here, if I can find it. Because I think there is, and I think maybe that was what Paul Madsen had as well, this idea, right? You can't become a millionaire in Scandinavia. And I think if you look at some of the numbers, right, it's what we call ultra high net worth individuals, right? People with a net worth of at least $30 million. Bam. This is kind of the list where you see those people, right? Of course, most of these people are in the US. But if you then change that per million, how many of these ultra high net worth individuals are there in different countries per million people? It looks different. Then Denmark is number 5. Canada is number 4. New Zealand is number 3. Sweden is number 2. Norway is number 1. And United States is all the way down on 13th here. So what you have found in Scandinavia, you can see the same is actually the case with billionaires as well, right? They're the US company a little more, but Sweden and Norway has a number of billionaires as well. One of the things that you see that the Scandinavian governments have been doing in the 1990s and the 2000s is they have done everything they could to liberalize the economy, making it as free and investment friendly as possible. So if you read The Economist, you will know, for instance, that The Economist basically each year say that Scandinavia has some of the freest markets, labor markets and investment markets in the world. And it's fewer regulation, for instance, to start a startup, begin a new company in Sweden than there is in the US. So it's kind of a little counter what we would think would be the case 30 or 40 years ago. But there has really been some governments who has worked hard to make that happen.
Michael,
One of the things that you hear often when you think about health systems in Europe, and particularly Northern Europe, is that the socialized kind of medicine is of lower quality than the medicine here in the United States. So I just wanted your take on that.
I mean, I mean, it's a
Is
difficult question, right?
is the quality of care as good as it would be here?
Yes, and I think what you see in most Scandinavian countries is there's a partnership between public and private. For instance, in Denmark, which is what I know of the best, right? If you need a surgery, if you need something, the government has 50 years given you an option. You can choose to go to a private hospital, or you can choose to go to a public one. Typically, it turns out there's a longer wait list for non-life-threatening things at the private ones than the public ones. And the care might not be as extensive as the private one. So most people actually choose the public ones when giving the option. But it's a way, this partnership or this competition is to make sure that the public is doing their absolutely best. I think one of the things that is philosophically different is that you do preventative care in a different way. That there is a little more the sense, if you do too much preventative care, it also creates a psychological insecurity around your health, right? That you might feel that you are more ill. So I think that's one difference. And then you start early too in schools to make sure that the kids are healthy, that they have free dentists up until they're 20 years old, right? So if there's any issues there, that will be taken care of. But of course, all health care systems now face some of the same problems, right? Rural areas, hospitals outside metro centers have a very, very hard time attracting doctors. One of the things that is not as big of an issue though, here in the US, right, getting general practitioners, right, family medicine is a big struggle right now. That has not been as much of a struggle in Scandinavia. So
last question, Ken.
I think I've sometimes been asked, where would I prefer to go? What would I actually prefer, the Scandinavian or the American? And I think there are good things in both sides, right? Small anecdote, my son was born in Texas, my daughter was born in Finland. And the experience at the hospital was very, very, very different. In Texas, here in American, right, my wife giving birth was clearly a medical procedure. There were doctors, they had all kinds of protective gear and it really felt like this sterile environment. In Finland, there were no doctor present. There was a midwife, there was a doctor down the hall, so but there was a midwife and a nurse. They turned down the light and kind of made it a welcoming atmosphere. And the second the baby was out, they came out with a little tray with some apple juice and snacks from my wife and I. So you see here, I mean, there's also a philosophical difference in it. And I'm not going to say anyone is, at least from me, better than the other.
Last question, Ken.
My question is about conspicuous consumption. I had a friend in Norway that immigrated from the United States, and he was allowed to rent a car from the United States to Norway without any taxes on it, because he was immigrating, and he had a very fancy car, and he was bringing it to Norway. His friend in Norway, which is very rural, told him, leave it in Oslo. You will not make friends by driving that car around here in Holland and Norway. So I just wonder what any comment you might have on that.
Did you hear the question?
No, I could hear something with car and moving.
Yeah, a friend of Ken's immigrated from the US to Norway, a rural city or rural town in Norway, but brought a very conspicuously fancy car. And he was told to leave it in Oslo, that if you drive that around the rural area in Norway, you will not make many friends, basically. So the idea of conspicuous consumption, which a lot of Americans are into.
And yes, it's a two-sided coin here, right? We have what you call the jantelov in a Scandinavian context, the egalitarian aspect. It's something that still exists outside the main cities. It's not really something you see if you go to Oslo or Stockholm, Helsinki, or Copenhagen. But outside there, you see the notion that don't think that you are more than me, right? That you really have to push people down that way. But with the number of new millionaires and billionaires, of course, there's been a change in that. And I think for fancy cars, I don't know what a fancy car would be, but I know today, right? Norway is the country in the world where most people drive Teslas because they're so heavily supported and trying to encourage a green economy. And I think Teslas, at least in the US, are pretty expensive, aren't they?
Yes.
Yeah. So supposedly there's so many people buying new Teslas that it's hard for them to sell the used ones because people have a lot of money there to buy more cars.
Well,
no taxes on Teslas when you import them from the United States.
no taxes on Teslas if you import them into Norway, apparently, is what Ken says. So
Yes, right.
yes, and it is the environmental message of an EV. We're going to have to move on, but we thank you very much, Klaus, and
thank you so much for having
appreciate
me.
your thoughts. I have, I think, 4 items to share here with everybody. I'll pass them around. One is a thank you from a speaker in a couple of weeks, the Madison Reading Project, right? End of the month. They sent a thank you here. We also have a thank you card from a program from the Wisconsin Youth Symphony Orchestra, where we're listed as an organizational donor. And Dick brought this in so you can see the company we keep with our downtown Madison Kiwanis. Third is a photo from our ACE committee meeting. You can see all the smiling faces. We had just finished probably 30 minutes of caroling together. Most of us, I don't sing, so I just move my mouth. And lastly is the duty sign up. So please sign up for things. I'll do 2 each way. Up, number 5. From the board of direction, from the district foundation, Kiwanis District Foundation, thank you card. Jerry, you have an announcement.
You haven't heard from me much lately because for the blood drives, because they've been doing some switching around and I have a new coordinator over there. And the new one told me we have a blood drive coming up at the Department of Revenue on January 26th. That's a Wednesday, about 2.5 weeks from now. Got a couple of people that I've talked to that are interested in doing it. The website is available to you. to sign up, or you can talk to me later or respond to an email as well. We will not then have another blood drive at Department of Revenue until May, because the next one would normally be in March or April, and they don't allow us to come and pester them while they're playing with their taxes. So
Well, is there free revenue if you go work there?
if you go work there, they'll give you a salary.
Thank you. Tom, bingo report.
We had another wild bingo game last Thursday. I want to thank Kevin for showing up to help. My other helpers couldn't make it that day. And again, it's always the first Thursday of the month at 10:30 to 11:30. We give away a lot of candy, makes people very happy. We're a nice turnout, and it's always a good time. So come on, join.
Other announcements. All I want to remind you of is next Monday's meeting is a intra-club discussion. We're going to talk about survey results. Eileen, you're going to lead that section, I hope. I haven't asked you yet, but Eileen, will you lead that section?
Yeah.
Publicly say no if you want.
If you're there to have me. lead
Yeah.
this section.
You took charge of the survey, so I will, and the board's already discussed it. After next Monday's meeting, the board will be meeting right here. So we're going to take what we talk about from our regular meeting and hopefully have some action items for the board to consider. So if you want to stay around for the board meeting, you can do that next Monday. Other announcements, I don't have a lot. I did put in a note about Herman. He is not doing well. I think Kevin and I talked at bowling last Monday, Kevin, his son. I think he's given up. He's tired. He is basically just sleeping. He's being moved to skilled nursing and hospice care this week. So keep Herman in your thoughts. 94. Herman will be 95 sometime this year, but he's 94. And within like 2 weeks, he went from being at bowling, keeping our stats, to not even coming, not wanting to come. So he's really gone downhill very, very quickly with heart, kidney, lung, all different maladies. So it's sad to hear. And Kevin is a bit annoyed with his father for giving up, but you got to respect a person's decision. He's tired. Any other announcements? Okay, I think I didn't take a look. Thanks to you all for coming on Zoom.
Moment.
Okay,
Oh,
recognize, I think we have an after hours person there.
oh, we do. Is Jennifer an after hours person?
Yeah.
Jennifer, do you want to share a little bit about yourself since it is a new name on our Zoom screen here?
Sure, I can do that. I'm just excited I was able to make the meeting today. My name is Jennifer Crotty. I'm part of the After Hours Club. I am a former Circle K-er, actually. I was in Circle K at UW-Madison. And just joined Kiwanis again within the past 3 years. So yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to be around.
Thank you. Glad to have you and an interesting discussion for all of us to consider.
Are you happy, Jennifer?
Ed wants to know if you're happy. Oh, is it a generational thing?
Well, my lunch break is in 2 minutes. I'm very happy about that.
Okay. I want to thank Eileen for taking over greeting today. And who else did some work? John Esser for the moment of reflection is up right now. So we will end on that. And then I will ring the bell and we can leave.
Thank you, Kevin. Has anybody heard of a term called the Veblen effect?
What?
Veblen, V-E-B-L-E-N effect, E-F-F-E-C-T. Well, here, we'll learn something about it today. I received this note, this piece of information from a friend on the internet. And I pass a lot of information around with friends back and forth. And this was one that I received from one. And it starts off, at 23, Julius Caesar was a junior politician on his way up, and he had two substantial advantages, competence and brains. While sailing across the Aegean Sea, he was captured by Sicilian pirates. They demanded a ransom of 20 talents of silver. That is about 620 kilograms, worth about $600,000 today. Caesar told them that they were being ridiculous. He couldn't possibly be allowed himself to be ransomed so cheaply. The pirates hesitated. They were confused. Caesar insisted the ransom must be raised to 50 talents of silver, about 1,500 kilograms, worth about $1.5 million today. Now, the pirates had no idea what to make of this. Normally, their captives tried to escape as cheaply as possible. They didn't understand what was going on, but if he wanted to double the ransom, why argue? They let Caesar's men go to Rome and raise the money. No one had ever been ransomed for such an enormous sum ever before. People assumed that he must be someone very important to be that incredibly important. Thus did the demand for such an enormous amount of silver for ransom put Caesar on the political map and made him famous. He had just invented the Veblen effect, though Thorsten Veblen didn't give it that name for another 2,000 years. Interestingly, the Veblen effect is an illusionatory psychological strategy that has been used for generations and for thousands of years. It demonstrates the phenomenon wherein consumers perceive higher priced goods to be of greater value and be much better than they actually are, simply because they cost more. Ironically, despite all the knowledge, technological advancement, as well as awareness and detailed understanding of it, the Veblen effect continues to persist. There are many examples: Rolex, Cartier, Bentley, Rolls-Royce, Aston Martin, Louis Vuitton, Harrods, Crystal Champagne, and more. These products may not be any better functionally than their cheaper alternatives, but their higher prices alone make them better and more valuable, and therefore more desirable. Caesar effectively made himself a Veblen brand. He produced a much higher value on himself, placed a much higher value on himself than anyone in Rome. But as far as anyone in Rome knew, it wasn't he who had done it. It was an independent valuation that had been done and made credible and authentic. And Caesar, because he was now so highly valued, his men had little trouble raising the ransom. They returned to the island and freed him. But Caesar wasn't going to allow the pirates to keep that sort of money at all. An important and famous man as he was, it was easy for him to raise a huge force, which he used to hunt down the pirates, take back all the money, plus everything else that had been pillaged, and then he executed all of them. Thus, Caesar became both very rich and very famous. In time, that combination of confidence, intelligence, he became the ruler of all Rome and presided over the golden age of the Roman Empire, expanding it into Germany, Spain, Britain, and to the Middle East, because Caesar understood that reality begins in the mind. So the most important piece of real estate in which to stake a claim is the human mind. How to stake a claim in the mind is by creating a perception, and to create that perception is by controlling the context. Control the context and you control the mind and you control reality. A very good example of this Veblen effect is Johnny Walker Double Black Scotch Whiskey. The basic JW Black is labeled as being 12 years old, but JW Double Black has no age statement. Nonetheless, JW Black Double Black is sold at a much higher price than basic JW Black, based on the perceived notion that Double Black must be better than just the black. And this is reinforced by Double Blacks being much costlier to buy. That is how the human mind works. In reality, In reality, no one knows what is so special about double black, except that the label claims it is very smooth, without actually saying it's smoother than black. Many people believe this is a simple marketing strategy to pass off unaged Scotch whiskey at a much higher price through the Veblen effect. And that is how the Veblen effect, when properly implemented, becomes a highly successful and profitable marketing strategy to separate consumers from their hard-earned money while simultaneously leaving them feeling good about it and continually coming back for more. Thank you.
John, we know that is the snob of you.
I will leave you with the 3 words from Klaus's talk: community, friendship, and togetherness. I think we are here because of those 3 words. So thank you for coming, and we'll see you next week.
Find that now.